the tools for thinking that are developed and proven and refined in the sciences and in the other academic disciplines have sort of filtered down into popular culture and become part of the ambient culture that you learn independently of school. And that this is why people are actually thinking better. They're actually better problem solvers, they see patterns better, and so forth. In any case, it's a hypothesis that hasn't been disproven and has a good chance of being the right answer to that question. And the reason I mention it is because if you ask me, wait a minute, are you saying that these thinking tools actually make us smarter? I'm saying, yes, they do. So what are some thinking tools? Well, par excellence, the thinking tools are words. Can't do much thinking without words. And I'm reminded of a famous line of Goethe's. When ideas fail, words come in very handy. He really did say that. And when you think about it, you realize what wisdom is there. When the thinking gets really hard, you can often use words as a certain sort of prosthetic device, a crutch, to help you over some difficult stretches. Numbers, obviously, are thinking tools. Diagrams, maps, methods of all kinds, from finding the average to long division to cost-benefit analysis, you name it. Notice that these are all quite abstract things. They're techniques for handling information in your head rather than tools that you plug in or need a power source for. Then there's intuition pumps. I coined the term way back in 1980 or 81 in order to talk about John Searle's famous or notorious Chinese room thought experiment. I said it's an intuition pump. And because I was on that occasion criticizing, a lot of people thought that I meant the term intuition pump pejoratively. No, I didn't actually, and I've since explained that I think intuition pumps at their best are wonderful. They are the best philosophical thinking tools there are, and they always have been. If you look at the history of philosophy, Plato's cave, Socrates teaching the slave boy geometry, Descartes' evil demon, Hobbes' state of nature. These are the great melodies of philosophy that you remember long after you've forgotten the details of the arguments. So philosophers have always used intuition pumps, little stories, scenarios, vignettes, and they're not typically formal arguments. They're little stories. It's not like doing sums. When you get to the end, you've got the answer. Very few intuition pumps are like that. They're much more like Aesop's fables. You get to the end, there's a little moral. Interesting you'd put it that way. And if it really works, you pound your fist on the table and say, it's got to be that way. That's the intuition that's been pumped. Now, they're persuaders, in other words. Somebody wrote me the other day saying, well, I've looked at your book now, and I think what you're really talking about in every case, you're talking about social thinking. You're talking about persuading others. It's very much interpersonal. And I wrote back and said, yes, and in fact, I should have stressed that more. All really serious thinking is interpersonal, I think. I think that's, in fact, one of the keys to how we think is by challenging each other with our ideas. Lovely case in point, Andrew Wiles proved Fermat's last theorem a few years back, but nobody could be sure, even Wiles himself couldn't be sure he'd done it until his peers, his colleagues in mathematics, who would dearly love to have the honor of having proved Fermat's last theorem themselves, until they had signed off and said, darn it, yes, he's got it, congratulations. This competitive opponent process between people is actually one of the key intuition pumps are the key thinking tools all on its own. And so this is a book very much about how to persuade others and yourself about difficult matters. They're also tools of discovery. By exploring these vignettes, you encounter either problems that you hadn't anticipated or sometimes opportunities that you would not otherwise notice. And they hold our attention. You can just refer back to them, and at least they give you a focus on a topic that's very useful. Now, some fields of academic inquiry have lots of fixed points, just immovable bedrock. Philosophy, I think, has none. Hardly a one. Maybe the law of non-contradiction, according to Aristotle. What we have are candidates for fixed points. We say, in effect, suppose for the sake of argument we treat this and this and this as fixed points. Now, what follows from those 3 points? Triangulate those, see what kind of a theory you can make of that. See how the questions look if we take those as fixed points. So very often an intuition pump is a wonderful fixer of a candidate for a fixed point. And that's a very valuable tool in itself. How powerful are these tools? They're this powerful. They drove what is one of the great biological phenomena in the history of life on this planet. Paul MacCready, the late great green engineer, if you don't know who Paul MacCready is, I'll probably be able to identify him for you by drawing attention to the fact that he's the one who designed and built the Gossamer Albatross, the human-powered airplane that flew across the British Channel. He pointed out that 10,000 years ago, a twinkling in biological time, at the very dawn of agriculture, our species, plus its livestock and its pets, was a fraction of 1% of the, by weight, if you like, of the terrestrial vertebrate biomass. A minor primate. What is it today, 10,000 years later? Any guesses? 99%? 85%? I hear any others? You know that's not true. There are a few bears out in the woods. But it's 98%. Most of that's cattle. But in 10,000 years, our species, plus its domesticated animals, have completely transformed the biosphere in a way that really hardly, I don't think any earlier global event can compete with that for the changes that have been wrought in just 10,000 years. And this is what MacCready says about it. Over billions of years on a unique sphere, chance has painted a thin covering of life. I love that image. Chance has painted a thin covering of life, complex, improbable, wonderful, and fragile. Suddenly, we humans have grown in population, technology, and intelligence to a position of terrible power. We now wield the paintbrush. That's true. And we have the same genes that our ancestors 10,000 years ago had, that our ancestors 100,000 years ago, pretty much. It's not genetic, it's thinking tools that have made this all possible. Which raises a chicken-egg problem. Did evolved tools make us smarter? Or did we evolve to become smart enough to make tools? And the answer, as to all good chicken-egg problems, is yes. It's co-evolutionary. It's a sort of bootstrapping thing where we get a little bit smarter, smart enough to make a few tools, and then those tools make us smarter still, and so it goes, building and building and building. My next book is going to be about that process. So, some simple tools from the book. everybody knows reductio ad absurdum, even if you don't know the name. It is that you might say it's the great crowbar of thought. It is the way you budge people from their position by taking their premises, saying, well, if we assume, for the sake of argument, that your premises are such and such, look what I can do, and then you deduce logically from those premises a contradiction, something absurd. In fact, we use this all the time more informally and don't even notice it, but it's really the same thing. I mean, if you say, if that's a bear, then bears have antlers, that's really a sort of reductio ad absurdum argument. I mention it in part because I want to point out that although we use reductio ad absurdum arguments in either expanded or truncated form, we also imply them all the time using rhetorical questions. A rhetorical question, whenever you see one of those questions that isn't supposed to be answered, stop and think about it. It's an implied reductio. The idea is, you can't answer this question. It would be, it's so obvious that the answer to this question is so obvious that I don't even have to mention what the answer is. Everybody knows, nudge, nudge. Well, that means that a good practice, a habit to get into, is when you see one of those question marks in a document, a rhetorical question, try answering the question and see if maybe it's not so ridiculous after all. In one of my favorite Peanuts cartoon strips, Charlie Brown says something like, well, who's to say what is right and what is wrong? And Lucy says, I will. And try it, you'll like it. Sometimes you can really bring a person up short by just answering their rhetorical question. Then there's the surely alarm. I tell my students, every time you see the word surely, a little bell should ring, ding, and you should pause, hearing the surely alarm, and you should look to see if you have just found the weak point in the argument. Why? Well, what follows the surely is a sentence that the author wants you to believe, is putting forward as true. It's not so obvious that it goes without saying. If it were, it would go without saying. And here the author is putting it in, but not bothering to argue for it. Instead, trying to get by on the cheap with a little nudge, a little surely. So if you have a surely alarm, and it becomes just a habit in your mind, this will stand you in good stead. I've been inviting people to send me, now that they've installed a surely alarm in their brain, send me examples where they catch a surely marking a weak spot. I did a little research on this. I actually went and string searched for surely in several dozen, actually more like 70 or 75 philosophy papers online, and found a couple of dozen surelys and checked them out, and about a third of them were, I thought, clearly the weakest point in the case being made in that article. It doesn't work all the time. There's a lot of false alarms. You can go ahead and use the word surely every now and then. But if you hear the word surely, you should ding. So just give it a little try, because surely if you, I didn't hear it. Surely if you get in the habit of whenever you hear the word surely, a little bell rings. Practice, surely, ding. Thank you. Now look what I've done. I've just downloaded an app to your necktop. In the same way that an app on your smartphone adds to the functionality of it, gives your smartphone a new talent, a new capacity. It's like Google Alert or something like that. You now have another little tool in your kit that may very well alert you to a weak spot in some argument that you're otherwise impressed with. Computers are, of course, thinking tools par excellence. And there's a lot about computers in the book, and I have learned from many years' experience that a lot of people think they understand how computers work, and they don't really. And if they just understood a bit more, they would understand a lot more things that can be easily understood with the help of computers. So there's an interlude on computers, including what must be an eccentric first in a trade book. There's actually a chapter which teaches you how to program the world's simplest computer, a register machine. And there are even problem sets with the answers at the back of the book. If you will spend a couple of hours with that chapter, you will understand computers the way you never understood them before. But of course, you're free to pass over that if you really don't care. How Wang, by the way, was a philosopher who came up with the idea of a register machine around the same time, a little after Gödel's famous proof and Turing coming up with the Turing machine. And the Wang register machine computes everything that's Turing computable. So it's a user-friendly alternative to a Turing machine. If you've ever tried to program a Turing machine, you know it's hard, it's very counterintuitive, but a register machine is very easy to understand. It's the world's simplest computer, and there are some little exercises on that. Now here's some thinking tools. Well, actually, this picture, I want to point out, this picture is all by itself a thinking tool. It draws attention to a rather striking comparison and provokes reflection. The one on the left is an Acheulean hand axe. The one on the right, I don't need to tell you. Notice, the Acheulean hand axe was used in this form unchanged, without any noticeable improvements for over 1 million years. Weird, really strange. The mouse, in comparison, has only been around for a few decades and is probably on the way out. The speed of tool use and improvement is picked up a little bit over biological time. Here's another thinking tool all on its own, the comparison between these two entities. On the left, you see an Australian termite castle. On the right, you see Gaudi's famous church in Barcelona, the Sagrada Familia. They're strikingly similar in appearance and actually in structure, even internally. They're quite remarkably similar. So here are two artifacts made by animals, looking very similar and yet profoundly different in both the design and construction. The one on the left is designed by Darwinian processes. Clueless, mindless little termites. It's all local action. There's no blueprint. There's no intelligent designer. There's no boss. There's no hierarchy. It's bottom-up construction in sort of every sense of the word. Whereas Gaudi is the very model of an intelligent designer. Autocratic, full of manifestos and blueprints and orders, ordering the underlings around. Now, they're both natural. And one of the really interesting questions is, how do we get on this planet, how did we get from termite-style design and construction to Gaudi-style design and construction? How did the second kind evolve from the first? That's a very deep and interesting question. That's the one that I am now devoting as much time as I can to and will attack in the next book.